Definitely. Don't hesitate to write those as I'm talking, especially if something comes up, because we want to make sure that we can circle back to things. So I'm excited to be here today, and especially with this topic, because I think that this is one of the scariest parts about being in a relationship. I think that balance between what I need and who I am, and what the relationship needs and what the relationship is a really tricky one to navigate, especially when things have been disrupted by addiction. If you've been betrayed, if you're an addict yourself, and you're really trying to figure out how to save things, build things, move on from things, whatever the case may be. I think it's really important to know yourself in your relationship, because my philosophy is that before we can have a we, there needs to be a me. So I have about four pointers today on kind of keeping that sense of self strong in your relationship. We'll talk about those briefly, and then we will take questions. So the first thing to keep in mind is we like to think that our true self is really shiny, and that when we have our true self in a relationship, everybody loves us and things work great. I'm here to say that that is not 100% the case. Oftentimes our true self can carry some fear, we can carry some uncertainty, we can carry a lack of skills into a relationship that make the relationship hard. And so I would say the first pointer, or the first point in being yourself in a relationship, is you have to be all you. Like they say in the 12-step rooms, warts and all, you have to show up with all of it. What that starts to do is that sets some basic boundaries. In my opinion, a boundary at the most basic level is simply a statement of how you feel, what you think, or maybe step 1.5 is maybe what you need. But those boundaries are really important because it starts to set the difference between you and the person that you're in a relationship with. And usually noticing that difference is something that scares us. But without that difference, we can't feel movement towards, like we can't feel our partner showing up for us if we don't let our partner know that we're struggling today, or that we're scared, or that this thing that I have going on in my life outside of relationships is really important to me. So our partner knows to check in with us and see how that went. So on a really basic level, we start becoming ourselves in our relationships when we share our feelings openly and honestly. Now, me saying that, I'm definitely not under the delusion that every relationship is 100% safe to say that in. So I would recommend starting with people who have earned the right to hear your story, who you know will greet you most often with compassion and love, and understanding, because we need some confidence, and we need some successes under our belt in order to do that in our higher stakes relationships. But that's something to start practicing right away. If that's your relationship with your therapist, great, get more honest. If that's a relationship with a sponsor, a support person, a sibling, if you're there with your spouse, great. But look at, how can I be more authentically me in this relationship? That kind of brings us to the second point. As we get to know ourselves, warts and all, and the parts of us that work well and the parts that don't, we may notice there's some work that we want to do on ourselves. I'm of the opinion that there's no shame in that. I'm a therapist who goes to therapy. I believe that's really, really important to continue work on ourselves, because we're always changing and evolving. So the kind of work we do on ourselves, it's not always about dredging up the past or getting to how painful childhood was. Sometimes that work on ourselves is owning some of our confidences and our abilities. Sometimes that work on ourselves looks like being able to reflect accurately and openly on our feelings, our thoughts, and our behaviors. Whatever that looks like for you, I think that's a really key piece of being yourself in a relationship, because we have to have that piece of self carved out, and we have to feel that strongly in order to take that to a relationship confidently. And without that me space to feel me, we have a hard time doing that in our relationships. As you are discovering yourself, again, I'd put a plug here for sharing what you're learning about yourself. And again, it's got to be the right people. I have a friend, his name is Carver Brown, and he's the alumni coordinator at Pine Grove. in Mississippi. I met Carver a few summers ago. He came out to help some of the clients in our practice with a back to basics. It's taking all 12 steps in 4 1-hour periods. And as brilliant as Carver is, and as many awesome things as he had to say, we actually have the videos from that conference he did with us up on my practice's website. So I'll send that, as we're looking at questions, I'll send that link so you can check those out. But he said a lot of wonderful things. And the thing, though, that I've continued to think about 3 years later, he said there's 3 things that are necessary for you getting well and solving the problems that you want to solve. And he listed the first 2. And then the third one, he said, every day you have to tell somebody the truth about what's going on with you. And I've reflected on that a lot over the last 3 years. And I realized at the beginning, in my own change and recovery process, the truth about what was going on for me each day was not overwhelmingly pleasant. It was a lot of like, take a big breath and swallow this lump in your throat and tell the truth because that's good for you. And then I started to know over time that started to shift. And there would still be times it was like, take a deep breath and swallow the lump in your throat and tell the truth. And then there are other times where the most pressing truth that was going on for me that day is I had thought something that was meaningful to me, or I had felt something that felt like it gave me life. And I started to get this picture that there was more to me than just problems and struggle, and that I was just as scared to share the strengths as I was the weaknesses. And so it required work on both sides. But I think that that's really key in getting to know ourselves. The third point that I would make is that we have to feel a solid self. So one of the risks that we run in every relationship that we're in is that we lose track of where we end and the other person begins. And part of what gives us confidence to come into relationships and to be honest is we know that we're not going to lose us, regardless of what the other person says or what they need from us. Even if it's a positive need, we can stay rooted in our own reality. I think that's a real functional adult trait that we bring into relationships, and it takes practice. I can think of lots of people that I've worked with and myself. Every time I've stuck my neck out and done it from a place of I'm really sure that this is right for me, I'm usually bombarded with like 24 to 48 hours of doubt afterward. And if I'm not real solid in the knowledge of myself and the compassion for myself, I'll usually lose that truth that I took a stand for in that 24 to 48 hour period. When we have a solid sense of ourself, then we can feel the confidence to take some of those risks in our less stable relationships, the risk of being me, the risk of, hey, I have this feeling in relation to this thing that happens in our relationship, and this isn't working for me. I need to change. Because what that starts to open up, and I think we talked a little bit about this in the last webinar, what that starts to open up is negotiation, which is not, I used to hate that term for relationships because it sounded too much like we were going to exchange money. But negotiation is a really key part of what makes relationships work. And we have to have a really firm sense of who we are and what we're wanting in order to enter the negotiation in a strong, honest way. Without that, what we do is what I would call unilateral negotiation. And this is where we go through the conversation in our head about, what we want and what we would say and how that person is going to respond and how it's all just useless anyway, so we don't take the risk. And I get there are some situations where you may know the abusive nature of your partner, or you may know how risky it is to step out of line and the price that you will pay. So there are some relationship situations where it's maybe not the best idea to go with what we want in a strong way. But in many relationships, I think that it is a good idea to go with what we want in a strong way. And then we move into this collaborative compromise, where we start with what we need and what we want, and our partner may say, I see you, I hear you, that conflicts with something that I need and want as well. And then we enter this phase where it's like, well, can we find some room for both of us? I'm of the opinion that most people in recovery are here because they want to be. They're working on it because they want better relationships. And they want to give their spouse or their partner a good relationship too. So we tend to short circuit that opportunity to build strong relationships when we're making all the decisions by ourselves. This person won't like to hear it, so I'm not going to bring it up. I know they can't do this for me, so I'm not even going to make it an issue. And that's part of I would call it the really fun, scary part of relationships is after we put our need or our feeling out there, and then there's that quiet dead space in between while we're waiting to see how our partner responds. But that's also where the reward comes from, is when we do see somebody show up for us and show up in a way that we need. But to bring it full circle, we don't get what we need unless we can talk about it, unless we have a sense of that. I recently had a friend say to me, and this is one of those things that I've continued to chew on. He said it's hard to put up with a lot of crap when you're in a position of strength. And to me, that's really what becoming yourself in relationships is about, is getting to a position of strength, not so that we can give everyone their marching orders and tell them we're not going to put up with their crap. But when it's an important relationship to us, that we can start to renegotiate the terms, that we can have it be a relationship that feeds both parties instead of just one. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. That was a Forrest Gump moment. But if you have any questions on the topic. What's that?
Didn't you say there were 4?
I combined 2 of them together.
Okay.
But the getting to know and the sharing I had listed as separate, but I talked about them as one. So there's the 4. That's
fine. I just wanted to double check. So lots of good stuff in here. Let me check the questions here. So, I want to I'm going to get your questions. I want to comment on a couple things. So, you talk about getting to a position of strength. Can you give any tips on how do you get to that position? So I'm thinking about, if I'm in recovery, I don't trust myself. If I'm a betrayed partner, I've been gaslighted or whatever, so how do you find that stronger sense of self?
I was just working with a couple this morning. We started work because of his mother enmeshment issues. And one of the things that we've been working on is both of them hearing their own voice in their relationship. And I think that's really where any kind of therapy or healing starts, is when we start to hear our own voice. So that may be, at the beginning of discovery or disclosure, that may be showing up at a meeting or showing up in one of these and saying, here's the truth about what happened for me. I had a client just this week who was writing out her problems list for the first time, and it was all these really global things. She listed diagnoses and longstanding issues, and I said, what about day to day? What are the problems that you face? And we were talking about it, and she had a list of about 5 things, like her truck needed new tires. She frequently didn't make it to the grocery store to keep food in her house. And she looked at that and she said, you know what? This is a lot more overwhelming than these big things that I've been looking at. But she said, this is where I'm starting. This is actually where I'm starting. And she actually felt empowered by that because it was her own assessment. It was her own voice rather than the voices from the books that she'd been reading or the groups that she'd been going to. It was her own take on what she needed. So I think the starting point is in order to kind of develop your voice, you have to start hearing it. So like writing it out, talking to people. I do think there's some value of thinking about it, but there's something about getting it out of your mouth or having it come out of the end of your hand that makes it a little more real for you. And that's, I think, really where the movement towards change starts, is when we start with the truth about what's going on for us and we hear that from ourselves.
I think too, validating it with safe people, like helping. I remember early on, I had a hard time figuring out what I was feeling and just any kind of discernment. And so, like if I said, John, this is what I think I'm feeling, and that's probably how it would come out. This is what I think I'm feeling. And, you'd ask me a couple questions and I go, okay, yeah, that is, how I feel, or I, adjust it from there. So it was a process for me of finding that voice. Cause as an addict, I had numbed it completely. So,
and you know what, just like play as a child, finding out who we are is very experimental. It's a discovery process. It's not like there's this you that's sitting there fully formed that you're just going to trip across and recognize one day. So I would add to talking and finding your voice, like go and try some things on. Do it in consultation, of course. Like If you're early in recovery and you think that your authentic expression is being a bartender or something in the realm of get consultation. Don't experiment irresponsibly, but be willing to try some things on and to have the experience of like, no, this really isn't me. I can feel that. I don't think that finding out who we are is something that happens theoretically on the sidelines. We have to get in the game, and we have to see how it goes. That's also one of the things that really excites me about recovery, and especially recovery in relationships, is we have this opportunity to do this really exciting self-discovery journey, a lot of times with someone that we really care about.
I agree. You talked about personal therapy, and I 100% agree, and have continued after multiple decades in recovery to engage with therapy at different times. There was an issue that I could not have addressed early on, but then a couple of years ago, I was like, there was something that kept happening, and I was like, this is not serving me well, and it was time. I went back to my therapist, and we worked through it, and that has not been an issue since then. So, I want to continue the journey. I want to continue to discover. So I love, that you're talking about that. I was also thinking when you're talking about the unilateral, I was like, that's a recipe for resentment. If I've had a conversation about why he's not going to whatever, I'm going to be resentful at him, and he's not even had the opportunity to discuss it. So, for me, there was, I'm working from a home office now. I used to be out all the time. I'm fairly social, in case anybody had any doubt on that. So I was like, I said to my husband, I am going to need more social interaction. So my plan is that I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I would love to have you join me for any of these that you want to do, but I just want to let you know that this is what I'm thinking. And well received. We've negotiated, well, I want to participate in this, and you can go off with your girlfriends on that. And, yay, and ultimately, my needs are being met, his needs are being met, and we had places where we were able to participate together. So
and what a win to give your partner a chance to show up in a way that was a big deposit for you.
Yeah, and it wasn't hands on hips going, this is what I'm gonna do. It was like,
right,
I'm telling you how I feel, and like otherwise you're gonna have a stir crazy wife. So John gave in the chat for any of you that are interested that Back to Basics. I know Carver Brown, he's phenomenal. I have been through the Back to Basics program as well, and I think highly of it. That that is how the 12 steps first came out. Is like you went through them quickly and frequently, so you just kept doing it. And I think it's a great way to do it.
I'll also put a plug in there. This may be the hardest that you laugh in any kind of recovery stuff to this point. Carver is hilarious.
Hilarious. So yes, and just a good guy. And from being from the North, his little Southern accent is really fun too. So, yeah. Okay, on to questions. There's a mid-40s gay man, partner of 20 years. After several disclosures, finally got the bad one. Ooh, I'm sorry. This past September, put him on a plane to a 2-week inpatient program several weeks later. He's been back for 5 weeks now. He's seeing a CSAT therapist. Great. Couples therapy together with me with a CSAT. He's read out loud several Carnes books. Cruise Control and Doghouse is the one next on our list. Great. Things are getting better slowly. He's sober 90 days. That is amazing. Last week I brought up a subject that was a trigger, something I didn't know was off limits talking about, and he lost it. Got angry, called me paranoid when I said it was not cool to call me that. It was not cool to call me crazy. He made things worse by lying, saying he never said it. Took an hour or so for him to get out of the mode and realize his addict self had come out for the first time since coming home from inpatient. It was scary, really scary. I totally understand how quickly that could flip back. I tried to take a step back, but what should I do in that situation?
Yeah, that's unfortunately, I would say there's a high chance for that early in recovery. There's the getting sober and getting accountable piece, and then there's the learning how to contain myself piece that happens over time. So some positives that I'm seeing in here is it sounds like there was some coming back together and some like, hey, let's revisit this when we're not so emotionally elevated. I think that is a great relationship skill. I'm of the opinion that nothing ought to be off the table in a marriage or a committed partnership. However, the time that we sit down to the table and consume it really matters. So sometimes topics come up when we're not ready to handle it, and our emotions tell us that. So good on you for circling back and being willing to have the conversation again. I think we can often witness times where our partner's triggered, and that would mean that they're not in control of their emotions. The emotions are driving them rather than them using them as tools. It's really, really hard to de-escalate in a situation once it's already got going, especially if it's just the two people in the partnership. As a therapist, I'm trained and skilled in helping people do that, but on your own, it's difficult to do. I really like a pre-agreed upon timeout strategy. What this starts to do is it starts to give permission for both people in the relationship to take a break when they need to, when they're flooded, when their emotions are driving the bus. And it's really important that's pre-agreed upon, because if we just invoke timeout and our partner knows nothing about it, we're likely to send them more through the roof because they're going to feel abandoned or dismissed by us. But if we've talked about this ahead of time, and situations like this are really great to say, hey, seems like we've got some things to figure out here. Going forward, I'd really like to be able to handle this without us calling names, without us getting really elevated. So what would you think if we took a timeout? Either one of us could call it. And what the research indicates is that we need 20 minutes of not ruminating on whatever made us upset in order for our body to calm down. So I like a timeout strategy that has those 20-minute increments. You have separate space, separate time. You work on getting your body calm, and you check in every 20 minutes. So the partner who calls the timeout, I think, is the partner that's responsible for coming back and checking in if they're ready to re-engage. So you may come in after 20 minutes and you may say, I'm still really upset. I'm going to need some more time. But the key there is that we have really established we're interested in working this out. We're interested in resolving this. We're just not going to do it in a state where we're likely to hurt each other. Yeah, and if you're having this stuff come up in your relationships, if you're doing some couples work, this is great to talk to the couples therapist about, because there are some skills that can really help in the specific situations. But in general, I'd say attend to your nervous system first. Make sure that you are as calm and as peaceful as can be in interacting, because you'll have better outcomes that way. And you will feel less agitated and less confused in the end.
He added also that he doesn't get hurt, but he wants to make sure he understands he can't lie or call me crazy. I think that's a great boundary. I think, when you said, what could I do differently, or what, I was like, or the subject was off limits. Who knows what's going to be off limits? And I agree with John. Nothing should really be off limits. And I was thinking too that you may also get triggered at different times. So, both of you, particularly early on, can trip over the triggers. If I'd been asked early on what was going to be a trigger for me, there would be some obvious ones, but there would have been a whole bunch of stuff that I would not have known. And really, honestly, the issue that just came up a couple of years ago in therapy was one of those where, the bottom line was if I felt hurt, I had this, I always call it the white hot rage. It was like, I was rageful, and I'm sitting there trying to contain myself because I don't want to act out on it. But it was, and I was like, why am I so angry? And bottom line, something was tapping into a hurt for me. I could not have identified that, earlier on. It just, kept happening. So there will be ongoing things. I think I'm really happy with how much progress you're making so early on. It's like you're both committed to the process. So, I see if you both continue this, good things for your relationship and healing. So
yeah, I would add on this second part here about the making sure he understands he can't lie or call me crazy. That may be your sign that timeout needs to happen, and that may be what you communicate. Hey, if we get to this point where there's name calling happening or you're not being truthful with me, that's a sign to me that you are overwhelmed, you're flooded. And so I'm going to take a break. I'll be back. But that's part of that. Because we had this come up, we have the after the fact discussion, and the after the fact discussion helps us get to what we want to do in the future. Because that's, I think in many ways, that's how recovery goes, is we orbit these issues again and again, and hopefully it gets a little bit better every time. It certainly has a better chance of getting better when we can talk honestly about that. And when you this is part of that, like being me in the relationship, it hurts me when you call me crazy or when you lie to me. And that's not negotiable. I'm not going to stand here and get hurt. So I will take a time out.
Right. Well, and it just, it's not serving the relationship. It's not serving either one of you to be in that name calling and just, the anger. So yeah, good job. Keep coming back and tell us how it's going. So
yeah, definitely.
So next one, before I realized my husband was a porn addict, my husband ignored me, wouldn't talk to me, etc. We had several conversations about this and negotiated ways to spend more time together. He would sabotage the efforts we both came up with to the point that every need eventually died. Oh, I would beg for closeness and emotional intimacy and would get weeks of silent treatment, gaslighting, and blame shifting. Every once in a while, I will test the waters and realize he is just not capable.
I think there was a second part to this that I'm not seeing anymore. It was another line or two with a question.
You put it in the chat instead of there, so that's all. So
okay.
So that it wasn't a continuation of this. It was, I think. Let me just.
Okay. Yeah. So, I think there's oftentimes when it comes to sexual addiction, there's really two issues at play. There's the addiction part, which is the continuation of a problematic behavior despite the consequences. And then there's the intimacy disorder part. And you can go to any community-based support group in the country, and you can see people who have addressed the addiction part and not the intimacy disorder part. I see that intimacy disorder part, which is I don't know how to do closeness. I don't know how to negotiate for my needs. I don't know how to feel safe with another person. That takes a while to come to a point where you can work on that in therapy. I think a lot of addicts early on are really focused on the crisis. So saying, my spouse found out about this and they're really upset and they're going to leave me. So I'm going to do all the things that will make them not leave me, only for them to find out that getting sober was such a small part of the picture. What their spouse wanted was empathy. What their spouse wanted was connection, honesty, transparency. And in my experience, that takes work on a deeper level to start shifting that, and it takes a lot of time. I think it's difficult, but I see some hope. Here's another, like what I talked about, getting clear on what your story is. This last line here, every once in a while I'll test the waters and realize he's just not capable. I think last week we talked about the stages of change. And if your partner doesn't recognize that there's an issue, it's going to be really hard for them to change. So what you want to start looking for in situations like this is you want to start looking for the language of accountability. Can my partner recognize that they are not connecting with me in the way that I need? And can they do that without blaming myself or shaming themselves? Can they say, it's just honesty doesn't even cross my mind in a situation like this? Or I didn't even think to ask what you might have wanted or what you might have needed. My brain is just not working that way. When you see that language of accountability, that's where the stage is set for that person to start saying, now what do I want to do about this? But often this is where Pat Carnes talks about the mismatched stages of recovery. Often you may be in a place where you're like, I've got room for this great relationship. I want a partner. I want reciprocation. I want empathy. And your addicted partner may be saying, I'm doing really well just to not be relapsing all the time. And that's about all I can think about right now. So I think it's a place where relationships often struggle because we're not at a place to help each other with our needs at the same time, real often. And it can be for quite a while in recovery. But it's where I go back to those tips for being yourself in a relationship. Keep the boundary basic. Hey, I feel like I don't have the closeness from you that I would like to have. Even getting real concrete around that. I notice you don't make a lot of eye contact with me. I would really like that. Just those simple boundary invitations that can start to give our partner a little clearer idea of what we want, and maybe they can start to look at what it would take for them to get there.
With this one, I wasn't certain if this person is in recovery, because this is before I realized my husband was a porn addict. I'm not 100% certain that he is in recovery. If he's not in recovery, I can totally understand why he would not have any kind of emotional bandwidth to engage. The brain is so hijacked that that ain't happening. So, and I don't know what the situation is. If he's not, there's a self-assessment on the sexandrelationshiphealing.com website that you can look at. You can say, you may want to look at this, or give him out of the doghouse, or, there are things that you can do to start moving if he's interested. If there's consequences, he may move to recovery.
Yeah.
There are some people that never get recovery, and it's just sad, but it's true. So he has been sober for 3 or 4 years. He isn't in recovery. Okay. So, okay. All right. So that means he just isn't looking at porn, but
yeah.
Okay. And so for some people, they switch behaviors. They, I'm not going to do this, but I'm going to, drink, gamble, or I'm going to do whatever, okay.
A resource that I would encourage you to look at if you are interested in this relationship continuing, which how complicated are situations like this, right? We have this, I'm not getting the closest I need, my partner crazy makes me, but I still want to be with them. All of those things are really, really valid. There's not a right answer here. I've mentioned in these before, Smart Recovery, and there's a Smart Family and Friends that looks at effective ways of engaging your addicted loved one in deeper ways of healing, or even getting into recovery in the first place. And I'm learning how to facilitate groups along those lines. And there's really, really good information out there. You can go to smartrecovery.org and find the Friends and Family link. And the Friends and Family organization through SMART is designed specifically around getting loved ones into the treatment that they need. And it's effective ways of doing that don't destroy the relationship.
I just put that in you did too. I was going to say, I just put that in the chat feature, but okay. Any other questions? There's no questions or comments in the Q&A. The link says forbidden.
Let me do some work on that and find the actual link.
Family.org. Oh, dangerous. Oh, it may have, that's interesting. It may have malware. I wonder if they got hijacked. So, agree. So next week we'll share that link if we don't have it before. So.
Yeah, it's smartrecovery.org.
Smartrecovery.org. That's what I typed. But I got may have malware too. So.
Oh no.
Yeah. So I wonder if they're bad things happen. Smartrecovery.org. /family. Maybe that'll work. So. Okay, she found one. So good.
Okay. Right. Good.
So it's in there. Thank you. Anything else you can think of, since we don't have any questions right now?
Yeah, I would just say the questions that have been coming in, this highlights. So I went through these 4 points of being yourself in a relationship, and I want the group to know I'm not under any illusion that that's just really simple. As we can see from the questions and the stories that have been coming in, this is really tough stuff to navigate. And you can, through internet searches, going to your recovery meetings, talking to your therapist, you can get all sorts of ideas about how to proceed and what works and what doesn't work. The truth is that our relationships are highly individual. And so again, like I was talking with Tammy before we started taking questions, this is a big sandbox too. It's something to experiment with, find what works, find what doesn't. And I would say that the frustrating thing about getting our relationships to work the way we need is we often find a lot more about what doesn't work and a lot less about what does work. But knowing what to say no to, I think is just as important as knowing what we need to say yes to.
I was thinking these skills are applicable even for non-romantic relationships. All relationships are complicated, and
Mm-hmm.
knowing your true self. I think of my family and siblings, etc. And like I am different with my different siblings because they're different, and our relationship has to engage in a manner that works for each of us. So I think these skills. While we're mostly talking about a romantic relationship, there's work and there's your family, there's other, any other relationship, there's still opportunities to know your true self and to be, authentic, etc. So,
Yeah.
so there's a new question. How do you balance your own sex, love, addict recovery be there for your traumatized partner? It's two roads and I feel like I need to navigate.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're right. Wisdom was in the past that we didn't work on the relationship until we had two solid people and two solid people in their own recoveries. And what we're finding is that actually leaves a lot of relationships on the vine to deteriorate when they could be helped. And so I'm really glad that you're looking at this already, because that just the fact that you're aware that you need to be there for your partner who's been traumatized is a huge help. To me, this starts with some of that relationship negotiation. There may be some things that your partner identifies as a need they have from you that you're not capable of giving. And what do we do in addiction? We either ignore that need exists and we pretend that it has nothing to do with us, or we say, yes, I'll help you with that when we have no intention or no capacity to follow through. So part of where we start there is getting to know from your partner and like, what is the help that you need from me? Some may say, I just need you to get better. And so that means like you go to your meetings, you do your therapy, you stay focused in your recovery. Some may say, like I'm thinking of one couple that I've worked with where the wife was a sex and love addict. And the husband, for him, it's like, I need to know what your plans are. That helps me to feel calm. So we've really had to work in their relationship for her to remember that when she's going to be later than planned or when things aren't going as planned, that she calls and she says, hey, I'm just running a little behind. Or she sends a text and says, I'm on my way home. I ran into a snag. And just that little piece of accountability. But he was able to say that specifically. There are some times where your traumatized partner may bring up something that they need that you're not able to give, or it may not be good for you to give. And so it's important to be honest with that. So your partner may say, I just need empathy from you. And empathy is a skill. And if you don't have that skill, you may say, that's a really difficult skill for me to give right now. I am going to work on that. But that's not something I can promise that I can give at this time. And again, that's one of those things that I think we tend to enter some unilateral compromise on, where we say, well, our partner will never accept I don't know or I can't. And they may not. That may be hard for them. But the thing that builds trust is that you see consistency between what the person says and what they will do. So if we're constantly promising the moon and we can only deliver a handful of dirt, we're contributing to the disappointment with our partner. If our partner asks for the moon and we hold up our handful of dirt and we say, this is what I'm capable of giving. I know that it's not a lot, but I want to give it to you because I care about this relationship. There's actually, I think, more chance for connection and healing there than there is saying, okay, whatever you need, let's go for it.
Yeah, she tags in exactly. I know I can give some things and other actions I can't yet, but so want to. And I think that you're being authentic and just saying, I hear what you're saying. You're asking me for this. I'm not capable in this moment. And you may know why. I don't have skills yet, or that won't be good for my program, or whatever it is. You may not even be able to articulate it, but I think if you say, like, you're asking for this, I can do this, and I want to grow into this. I think that.
Yeah. And when we can't give, because helping and giving is one of the ways that we help people that we love. When we can't give, either because it's dangerous for us or we're not able to, seeking understanding will never hurt you. And so that can be another question that I see a lot of the addicts I work with have some success in working both of those roads that you talked about, is that can you help me understand why this is important to you? And then being a really good listener. That might mean you have to put down some of your defensiveness and your desire to say, well, you don't understand me and that's not what I meant and all that. But just sitting there, and sometimes I'll have couples, the one who's having a hard time listening, I'll say, your job is just to write almost verbatim what your partner is saying so that you can repeat it back and your partner knows that you're listening. And we won't worry about responding now. We won't worry about fixing this. Your goal right now is to show your partner that you understand them or that you want to understand them. I think our partner gets a larger place in our heart when we understand the context behind who they are. So I think in very few situations does it ever hurt yourself or another person to say, would you be okay telling me more about why that's important to you? What that means to you?
Yeah, that's helpful too, because there, sometimes I don't even know why, but like that would give me an opportunity to figure out, well, that's, I'm feeling abandoned, so therefore I want you to do all these things. Well, let's talk about how can I help you not feel abandoned, rather than all these little check off the list. So,
there's times I totally miss what my partner is saying to me because I see her only as the functional adult that I know like 95% of the time. But sometimes when I dive into that, like, hey, what's this about for you? And what's this story? I remember that there's also a little girl there. And that little girl shows up sometimes. And that can actually help me to remember better when I'm not just assuming like she's strong, she's smart, she's independent, which she is the vast majority of the time. And I'd say as functional adults, most of us are our best attributes the vast majority of the time. But we do have that little part of us that still needs some attention every now and then. And questions like, why is this important to you, really open the door for our partner to be able to talk to us about that. And then we hold them in this softer, more compassionate, fuller understanding place.
One of the things I wrote down when you were talking at first was vulnerability. And it really requires us in a relationship, if it's safe, to be willing to be vulnerable. And that can be so hard and scary. But I think that that's a learned thing too, and we're not going to get it right 100% of the time, and we're going to reach out to some unsafe people. But if we're willing to start, I think the rewards are so great if we're willing to try. So
definitely.
Any other questions? Comments?
We also have a major holiday coming up that can be tough in recovery.
Well, and just relationships, the family dynamics, you see Uncle George once a year and it's this time and, he drives you crazy, whatever, I'm making up. If anybody's named George, it's not you. Just make
it's not you, it's Tammy.
Uncle George, so yeah, no. But yeah, I mean, just, the extra, pressure and stress and everything else. I was talking to John before we started. I was traveling with Dr. Rob. We were in Singapore and Thailand, on business, and came back and I was like, I've got all this stuff to do. And so just the elevation, my personal anxiety of like all the things I need to accomplish, on top of being incredibly jet lagged and all of this. And my husband, bless his heart, has, like today, a little while ago, he texted and said, how you holding up? And I was like, just those little things. So, taking care of myself, but also, being supportive and just the, hey, I'm thinking about you.
There's a lot of things that stack up this time of year. For those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, it's darker, which we know has an impact on mood and emotion regulation and that. There's usually year-end goals with work or family or, things that we want to wrap up. And then there's, for a lot of people, there's family traditions and expectations around this time of year. Where I live, it's a lot colder and wetter than it is normally. And I'm like, if I can get outside on a regular basis, I'm okay. it's hard to get outside. So there's a lot of factors here that make it tough.
So there's I used to live in West Michigan, and we had lake effect cloud cover, and so I had to buy one of those sad lamps,
Yeah.
I had to, because I live in Arizona now, don't have that same issue. I left my lamp up there. So a comment, good point on holidays. When around my mother, I see me and where I came from in many ways. I feel such empathy for her, but I need to keep her at arm's length. But there's guilt about that too, of course.
Oh boy. Yeah. That's at the heart of an issue that is another passion of mine, kind of that enmeshment, where it's who do I take care of emotionally here. I've actually really appreciated becoming an adult and being able to empathize with my parents a lot more, to recognize what the best you can give actually looks like. At the same time, recognizing that hurts. And if our loved one is under the impression that the best that they have to give is fantastic for everybody, that is something that we need to have some arm's length for. But we can often feel that guilt, like I'm disloyal to the family. I'm disloyal to my parent. I live in a pretty conservative state, and I work with a lot of folks who are they're very religious and biblically religious. And I'll often hear this, and I just bring this up to illustrate kind of a mind shift point. I'll often hear this like, well, what about that whole honor your parents thing? Which is a big center of my belief system. And I'll often say to them, there's honoring your parents by fulfilling their expectations, but what kind of honor do you bring to a family if you grow up to be a person who's stuck and unhealthy and small and scared? Is there honor that comes from growth? And that's something to look at too when that guilt comes up, is what kind of gift do you give back to the family when you get healthy, even if that means some separation from the family and some distance. In my own personal recovery journey, I've noticed that I have a closer relationship than ever with both of my parents, but it's because it's on terms that work. I don't go into those relationships expecting things that nobody's capable of giving. I go there with a lot of acceptance of this is who you are in this moment, and this is who I am in this moment, and this is what we can do together.
Well, and for my parents, I think they gave me enough. They gave me enough to, and they gave me the gift of treatment. They sent me to treatment. And so they're not perfect. I understand their humanity. Yeah, I'm not perfect. I understand my humanity. And so giving them space, I don't have them up on a pedestal. I love them intensely. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure I've hurt them. They've hurt me. It is what it is, but I really do, I think I love and honor my parents, but without everything that they say and do is perfect, and they're always right. So, okay. Next question. My partner and I live in different states. Recently, while I was there to help him post-surgery, several ongoing online affairs literally popped up on the computer screen.
Oh, no.
I know, making a table to chart his meds. When I confronted him with what I saw, he initially agreed to cut off all contact with him. Since he's changed his mind about this and now isn't talking with me at all. I've sent out of the doghouse to him and asked him to read it. I've told him in a letter that I'm not willing to go forward without the support of a therapist for both of us. I've heard nothing back. I'm wondering if it's best just to let this go, or would it be helpful to reach out again?
That's tough. And I'm not going to answer what it's best to do because that's not my call. But I will say relationships are always giving us data about ourselves and the person that we're in a relationship with. And sometimes it can help. If we just have that data rolling around in our head, it can get really, really confused. Like I hear in this, there's this boundary that said, I'm not willing to move forward unless we have the support of a therapist. And then we've heard nothing. And now it's this like, should I let this go or should I move on? Sometimes it can help to literally write out the pros and cons, the costs and benefits. And I like doing that. This is an exercise from the Smart Recovery Tools. You look at the costs of staying, the benefits of staying, the costs of going, the benefits of going. And then you identify what short and long term. It can help to write down what is it that I'm seeing? What is it that I'm feeling? Because that can help you to stay clear on what you need in your head. In situations like this, the data very well can point to, this is somebody that I love, and it's like, this indicates that we need to take a different approach to making this work. Or the data can point to, this is someone who's not interested in making this work on terms that work for me, and that's intolerable for me, so I need to move on. But when love is involved, confusion is rampant, and that's, I think that's part of the adventure of love. But writing it out, especially if you're confused, talk with people that you trust, get their input, not because they're making your decisions for you, but sometimes a third party set of eyes can help us see things a little more clearly. But I would applaud the steps here. Confronted what you saw that wasn't okay for you. You've set a boundary. You are offering resources. And now you're evaluating the data. But sometimes the data we get back is heartbreaking.
Yeah, I don't even have anything to add to that one. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
I would encourage you. There is a partner support group. I'm off on schedule, but I think the partner support is this Wednesday at 12:30 Pacific time with Brittany. So I would encourage you to join that just as a support, and Dr. Rob has a webinar tonight at 5 o'clock. You can ask the same questions, see if you get other feedback. But yeah, I mean, I think this is great that you're reaching out too.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? So I mentioned a couple things. We've got drop-in groups. So there's a men's sex addiction drop-in group at 10:45 a.m. Pacific time each Monday. There is the partners group is alternating Wednesdays at 12:30. These are all Pacific time. There is Dr. Rob is doing his webinar at 5 o'clock today. Dr. David Fawcett, I think his is Wednesday. He's got some, we'll have some interruptions for holidays, but there will be some of them that will continue. So please watch the schedule. If you haven't already registered on sexandrelationshiphealing.com, please do so. I'll actually type that in because then you'll get the updates that, with the calendar information. There are several new drop-in groups that will be starting, including one for porn addiction.
That's exciting.
Yeah, and there's another one on spirituality, which I thought was
cool.
great. Yeah, so those that want to explore spirituality, in recovery, et cetera, that will be starting. So this platform will continue to grow, is what I'm basically telling you. With more opportunities, there will be some where you go, I want to go to this group, and this group, and there's others that you go, this is my thing. So whatever is a good fit for you. So they'll be on. This recording will be back on the website, as well. Some webinars are recorded, drop-in groups are not. So you can drop in, talk freely, and those are not ever recorded. So just want you to know about that. So I think until next week, we will say goodbye. But
thanks, everybody.
And then the two following, so Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, we will not be here.
Yep.
But then we'll be back in January. But next week we'll be here.
Okay.
Watch the calendar. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.